Rise of Hawk, Part 3, Scene 20. The next morning, 19th of Arakan, 3004, 4 years since Hawk emerged, in the great northern desert just south of Epa City. Asha shuffled through the various weapons and ammo in the back of their camouflaged truck. The morning was clear and sunny, and in the northern desert that meant their rescue had to be finished by midday. Most of the desert was made of black iron sand, which heated up pretty quickly in the sun. So unless the weather changed, by midday the dunes would be hot enough to burn skin and make the journey back to Epa over land far too difficult. Asha lifted their only sniper rifle out of the camouflage truck and continued searching for the cartridge that went with it. She and Orion had dreamed of doing this sort of thing, of breaking kids out of the desert training base, but the logistics of such a mission quite honestly scared the nooth out of her. Hawk said if everyone did as they were told, no one would get killed, and they had a good chance of getting the kids out, despite the fluxing nature of this event in time. After searching for ages, Asha finally found the remaining shell cartridge for Nama's rifle and turned away. She wished she could have left Talon back in Aram. There was an underlying sense of ill-ease about this mission, and his presence there only made it worse. Unfortunately, she couldn't change it now, so she had to just get on with it. She headed towards Terrace and Bana, who stood at the base of a large black sand dune that blocked the site of the A6 facility. As she approached the two men, Terrace spoke. "What are you going to do after this, cousin?" "I'm not sure, Terrace. It depends," answered Bana. As she neared them, she smiled warmly. "You could join us. I know Hawk would appreciate another high-ranking gun hand." Dark eyes looked away from her, and she sensed a spark of guilty sadness. "I'm not sure it's safe for Gusa, and she has to come first." "Of course." Asha nodded as she handed him the rifle and cartridge. "So I hear you're the best person to give this to." Next to him, Terrace laughed. "That's an understatement." He put a hand on Bana's arm. "My cousin Bana is a gifted marksman." "You're far too kind, Terrace." Bana chuckled, and his dark eyes glanced back at her. "Has it been maintained?" She nodded. "It belongs to Nama. He's very careful with his weapons. Unfortunately, that's all the ammo we have for it." "That's fine." He smiled. Checking her watch, she realized it was nearly time to start. She glanced back at the truck. "I've got to check on Raha and then the second group. We're about ready to move out. You two want to corral the others into their positions? They're probably going to need to find their cover soon." Terrace nodded. "Yes, boss." Walking back to the truck, she ducked under the sheet of desert camo. Young Raha sat with his back to her. A rough blanket formed a barrier between the black sands and the hub they'd stolen a year ago. "About done?" she asked. Silver grey eyes looked sideways at her. "Yep, nearly. Give me another 2 minutes and I can shut off their comms on your orders." She patted him on the shoulder. "Good work, Raha. I'll send a static signal over the radio when it's time to cut them off." He nodded and hooked the cell radio headset over one ear. "Yes, ma'am." Scene break. Through the binoculars, the front gate of the massive stone facility was all chain link and barbed wire. The place looked impenetrable to Talon, and he wondered how they would get these kids out, despite having about 100 rebels to help. More importantly, why would anyone put young adults and children in such a facility? It looked like a prison. On the subject of innocence, his thoughts drifted back to Nalana, and he wondered where she was or if she was even alive. He and Marcus had combed the city for hours before they left. She wasn't in the Ace of Spades, or if she was, no one knew she was there. He was sure she hadn't been at the cathedral either, even with the black stones mucking up his ability. And worse, with Nathan, her constant companion, shot for no apparent reason. It couldn't be good that she was missing. "Tay!" Asha called out from behind him. He shuffled back out of sight of the facility and slid down the sand to where she stood at the base. Brushing off the black grains from his ratty clothes, he looked sideways at her. "Yeah?" "We're about ready to go. Just waiting on Raha to get control of their hardline comms. We need to get into position." She looked tense and worried, more so than normal. "Yeah, sure." He followed her as she started towards their second group. She led him along the base of the massive dune and met up with Orion and 2 more rebels from Namassal. Is everyone clear on the plan? The 4 of them nodded. Good. All right, I know you want to help, but the moment those doors are open, you have to run. Got it? The younger woman rolled her piercing blue eyes. Yes, yes. I know how to follow orders, Ash. I'll do what I'm told. Asha started to laugh, a wonderful sound after so many days of seeing her exhausted and grumpy. It lasted for only a few minutes, and mid-laugh she stopped and swore. Hurry, we have to get out of sight. She scampered up the nearby dune and over the other side. Talon and the others followed her, and only when they got over the top of the dune to the other side did Talon hear the pulse of helicopter blades coming towards them. The copter shot low over the dune, and he looked up at its white underside as it passed. Sudden throbbing wind ripped at everyone's hair and faces, throwing dark sand into the air and making it nearly impossible for Talon to keep his eyes open. When the wind died down enough to open his eyes again, he watched over the next rise as the helicopter flew up over the fence to land on the roof of the 2-storied facility. We don't have much time. Come on, Asha yelled. Scene 21. Zack felt the tickle of dark static twirl around his arms in a loop-de-loop and rise up over the skin of his face towards the ceiling. The static behaved a little like some playful flying insect, and he would have laughed at the sensation had he been free to do so. The tickle meant that it was time for him to leave. He put his pencil down on the old wooden desk in front of him and glanced around the sparse classroom. The teacher stood at the front of the class with her stick, black hawk eyes watching everyone and making sure they did their work in perfect silence. He lifted his hand. Miss, may I go to the bathroom? He tried to sound as apologetic as possible. Her eyes narrowed at him suspiciously, and he sensed her mind tap inquiringly at his meagre mental shields. Don't be long, she barked. Getting to his feet, he stared at the floor and kept his face straight. He made his way between the lines of desks towards the exit. The excitement tried very hard to burst out of him, and he only managed to keep it under control until the door was closed behind him. As the door clicked, he grinned from ear to ear and sprinted down the corridor to their meeting place at the unisex bathrooms. As he ran, he heard the thrumming pulse of a helicopter above the building. The arrival of a copter was the second signal, and it was early. Nooth, he swore, skittered in through the bathroom door. The 2 cousins, Jai and Nick, were playing thumb wars near the sinks to his right. Liz stood against a wall with her arms crossed over her chest, and Levi sat on the baby blue floor tiles with her back against the stall, looking rather bored. Gotta go now, Zack panted. Liz stood upright. Go where? The camera gap near the exercise yard. Hurry. Scene break. Agent Hidan heard the helicopter begin its descent to land on the roof above him. Sighing, he got up from his paper-littered desk and headed out to meet them. An uninvited visitor was never a good thing. It was usually an inspector or someone from the city telling him how he should run his facility. This time, like any other, he wouldn't give an inch. Coming out onto the roof in the artificial wind, Hidan pulled his mouth into a firm, unyielding expression and crossed his arms over his chest. The landing helicopter had once been white, but after years of ferrying folks across the black sands of the Great Northern Desert from Epis City, it was faded and scratched. So much so that it could have once been painted lime green and it wouldn't look any different. The throbbing pulse of spinning blades lessened, and a door opened in the back of the copter. A light-haired man in an agency suit stepped out onto the roof with an air of great authority. Their eyes met across the roof, and Hidan knew instantly that this man was trouble, not because of his manner or even the harsh expression in his face, but because of his ice-blue eyes. Eyes of that colour and intensity meant that the young man was probably some close relation to the agency head, Sharon Cody Sr., and anyone related to him was trouble. The man approached him, and Hidan signalled with a wave that they could walk inside, away from the noise and wind. They walked down a narrow stairwell and into the white stone corridors of the second floor. The man thrust a broad, square hand at him in greeting. I apologize for the breach in procedure, he said briskly. This facility is about to be attacked by the rebels, and I've come to take over command until the attack is over. Hadan snorted. Excuse me? Lock down the facility and send all guards to defensive external positions, the young man ordered with an authority Hadan found rather offensive. I'm going to need your authority before I submit control to you. Who? The man took something out of his dark jacket and threw it at him to catch. It was a leather-bound agency ID. He flicked it open. There was no name, simply rank and the authority codes that said this man could do just about anything in his facility. As an A3 agent and ranking agent on the base, Hadan could do naught to stop him, because the young A0 outranked him by 25 levels and 3 entire divisions. Oh, he said, staring at the badge. The man seemed to know the layout of the building, because he turned confidently down the hall from the stairwell and went straight to the nearest lockdown button on the wall. Lifting the cover off, he punched the big red button underneath. The alarm sounded and lights flashed, signalling to all of the students to stop what they were doing and go directly to their sleeping cells. The same air of arrogant confidence, the new arrival strode into Hadan's control room. Initialize a full lockdown of the facility and send all guards to external defensive positions, he barked at Hadan's staff. Hadan stepped into the room behind him, and the 5 or so computer controllers looked tensely over the young man's shoulder at him. Do as he says, he said quietly. His people reanimated, turning back to their various computer terminals and camera screens. Approaching the young man from behind, Hadan attempted to sound respectful. Sir, don't you think we need a few guards inside to keep the children in their place? Ice blue eyes glared sideways at him. My priority is to hold this facility. How many guards do you have? A little under 100. That's not enough. There's nearly double that waiting in the desert. Send all available staff to defend the perimeter. The boy's voice was scathingly condescending. Hadan spoke through clenched teeth. Yes, sir. Scene 22. There were 3 cameras covering the hall that ran from their cells to the exercise yard. Close to the exercise yard was a narrow blind spot in the camera coverage, where a corner cut off the view of one camera and the angle was just slightly off for the other. Zack stood with his 4 friends huddled up close, so that all of them could fit in a small dead space. If they were caught by a guard or seen on the cameras before everything started, all of them would be executed for attempting to escape. He sensed this thought flicker across some of the others' minds through their shared touch. He knew then that if they had to wait much longer, they'd all panic and run. How much longer? Whispered Jai close to his ear. Almost. A siren echoed through the building, sounding the general alarm. According to procedure on that siren, all students were required to return to their sleeping cells. That was a signal for them to move. Go, he whispered. They skittered back into camera range and through the doorway into the exercise yard. Behind them, the yard door slammed down, blocking their exit. Now there was no way out for them. 4 sets of fearful eyes looked from the closed door back to him. They'll be here, he said, unsure if he completely believed himself either. Just start looking for the... There was a loud bang. It sounded again, and he turned to see the far wall shaking. That's the doors, Liz yelled, and ran towards the rusting surface. It was odd to watch what he had previously thought was a wall shake and rock. Even though he knew it had to be the rebels on the other side, he couldn't quite shake the image of some hungry monster trying to break in, perhaps a creature with sharp teeth. Liz interrupted his thoughts. There must be some kind of maglock keeping the door closed so they can't get in. Zack looked sideways at Levi. You think you can crack it? Maybe. Levi nodded. I'll give it a go. How about we have a plan B too? Liz stepped back and collected Jai and Nick with wide open arms. Let's push from this end. Jai and Nick held hands and stood next to the much taller Liz. Through physical touch, the 2 cousins were able to magnify their kinetic ability to be nearly as strong as Liz, so that together the 3 of them were fairly unstoppable. Gunfire sounded from elsewhere. It wasn't close enough to be a threat to them, but Zack still flinched. Hawk had said the rebels would be causing a diversion by attacking the front of the building to help their escape. Zack glanced anxiously at nearby camera lenses. He hoped that their attack was keeping the people in the control room distracted, because there was nowhere to hide from the cameras in the exercise yard. Scene break. Hadan watched the external cameras tensely. The rebels were attacking the front of the building from 2 different sides. There were a lot of them, and they had cover with the dunes and some old vehicles in the front yard. He frowned sideways at the young A0. How he knew that the attack was imminent was something Hadan would have liked to know. The perhaps more pressing question was why he hadn't brought reinforcements with him. Because, the young man glanced sideways at him, to deploy the needed reinforcements would have taken more than 2 hours. His voice was clipped and emotionless, his tone bordered on hostile. Hadan swallowed. The young man must be a telepath. He very deliberately, and with much discipline, redirected his thoughts away from questions that might get him shot for insubordination. The radio wasn't working, and neither was the backup hardline comm cable that ran into the desert. It was obvious that these rebels had planned the attack for some time. Hadan wondered what their purpose was in attacking. So far there had been no attempt to break down the front door, although there was no chance of that without a tank, and there had been no demands. "Sir," both he and the A0 turned to look at one of the newer operators. The controller cleared his throat awkwardly under the double gaze. Sirs, there seems to be some kids in the exercise yard." "What?" the A0 growled. Hadan followed the young man and looked over their shoulders at the security screens. 5 of the older kids stood in front of the yard gates. One woman had her hand to the wall, and 3 were back from it, and a 5th, a boy with dark hair, glanced nervously at them through the screen. Next to Hadan, the young A0 swore obscenely, glaring back at him. "I thought the lockdown forced the students into their cells. What are they doing in the exercise yard?" "Don't shout at me." A twitch of nerves reminded him that this man was A0. He adjusted his tie. Sir, we can't control..." "Sirs?" the A0 snarled. "What?" "Someone's hacking into the maglock of those doors." Hadan tensed as the young man smacked the control panel with the palm of his hand. "They're trying to free the kids." A pair of ice-blue eyes glared at him. "How many of the staff are stuck in the lockdown between here and that exercise yard?" Hadan frowned. "A handful? Why?" "Manually override each door as I get to it, and tell the trapped guards to meet me at the entrance to their sections." The man lifted back his jacket and grabbed a weapon from the holster under one armpit. Hadan noticed a small pool of blood on the white of his shirt before the jacket covered it again, and it took all of his focus not to wonder about its cause. The young man strode towards the control room door, but turned at the entrance. "I want captives for interrogation, not bodies." His voice degraded into a hostile growl. "Tell them if they kill any of my captives, I'll have their heads on pikes."